Hello and welcome to episode 115 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking week 3 of Major 3 qualifiers of the Call of Duty League. We have a roster change, and it seems like it could be an impactful one, even though neither one of us was expecting it, and I don't think either one of us was really expecting it to be very impactful at all. And then we'll get to our predictions at the end of the show. I think this one will be a little bit quicker because there wasn't really a ton of news after we had a long show last week talking about kind of the very future of the CDL. We don't really have that this week. It was more low key. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Episode 115, a special Easter egg in the tweet for this episode for any Zombies fans out there. But yeah, like you said, jam-packed episode last time, so probably a lighter one this go around, but still got some fun stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it also helps that it is very, very warm where both of us are living, and I'm already sweating. Just started the show, and I'm already sweating, so that's not a good sign. But let's start with the matches from this past week. Really, this weekend that we're just finishing up. We started on Friday. We only had 8 matches, I think, in total. Is what you said? Yeah. So only 2 on Friday, 3 on Saturday, and then 3 on Sunday. So the 2 on Friday were kind of surprises, at least in terms of our predictions. The 2 matches were Carolina versus LAT and LAG versus Minnesota. We both got these matches wrong. We both picked Carolina to beat LAT. LAT ends up winning this series 3-2. They win the hard points, and then obviously Game 5 to win this series. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Carolina just in general this season, considering the roster changes and what to really make of them. What did you think? Obviously, to lose Game 5 S&D has been the thing we've mostly talked with Carolina about.
Yeah, I mean the bigger thing for me is that LAT's won 2 hard points in this series. There was a time earlier this season, it feels like it comes up almost anytime we talk about LAT, where they were like 1-10 in hard point or something like that.
Yeah.
Then they made the first set of roster changes, and I think they did a little bit better, but obviously we were making the joke like it's hard not to do better than 1-10, 1-11, whatever it was. And now we're at a point where they're winning 2 hard points in the same series. I know it's against Carolina, but still that's got to mean something. So, I think I saw some tweets too. I didn't link it for this one, but it was like, um, maybe it was Octane or Enable or someone like that saying like they've heard like LAT have done well in scrims all year, it just hasn't materialized in matches, but maybe that's starting to happen. So I don't remember where I saw that, but I feel like I saw something along those lines, and that could be something to keep an eye on with this LAT team. So, um, they do play another match later in this week, so I don't want to, uh, you know, talk too much about them overall. And there's a whole another match to discuss for them in particular, but this was definitely a match we both expected Carolina to win, and they were able to come out on top. So it was an interesting way to kick off the week.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it was like a too big of an upset because both of these teams have been inconsistent. And really, I would say of the bottom 8, I would put these like in the upper echelon at times. Carolina can be a little more iffy. LAT has looked better in general, but obviously a great win for LAT. Kicks off the week with a good note. And then we go to LAG versus Minnesota, and this was an upset. This is, even though Minnesota has not been good at all, especially since Major 1, we both expected the Rocker to win. LAG has been abysmal online, particularly, and it was a 3-0 for the Guerrillas, which I don't know how many 3-0s LAG has had online, but this was a very impressive one. They win Rio, Invasion, and Karachi to sweep. Estriel obviously had a 1.4, but I think the big story of this is the debut of Flames, who comes into the starting lineup. What did you make of Flames' debut for LAG?
It's about as good as a debut you can have, really. So Flames coming in a solid now on the bench, but um, This was one here again. We didn't know about the roster change. I don't know if even the roster change would have swayed my prediction. It probably would have made me even think, yeah, I'll stick with Minnesota in a battle of teams towards the bottom of the standings just because LEG's history of struggling online. But they came out and then showed up in this one, and Flames in particular played very well. We have talked, and I know you have talked extensively on this podcast about the timing of debuts and who they're up against. There have been examples of pros, rookies making their debuts against teams like Optic and FaZe, but Flames in this case doesn't have to do that. He gets to make his debut against another team that's struggled over the last couple months, and he's able to show what he's capable of there. So that was pretty cool. I believe he dropped 30 in map 1. He went 13-2 in map 2, and that elicited a response from Octane saying it's a Flames masterclass. This guy was riding the bench with a billion question marks. So he seemed to turn some heads in what was you said a 3-0 for LAG. I would very much wager that this was potentially their first 3-0, especially online, and if they had more, you can definitely count LAG's 3-0s this season on one hand. I would feel safe making that statement.
Yeah, I'm trying to look through their matches to see if they would have had any other 3-0s. Just looking through Breaking Point, they had a 3-0. Their first win of the season online was 3-0 versus LAT. So there you go.
LA, they dominate that.
So which was December 17th. So if you're following along at home. So obviously been a while. LAG has been possibly the worst online team so far this year. I think they've gotten almost like 90% of their points on LAN, which obviously it's kind of worked out for them relative to someone like the Breach, who have really done neither of those things. And let's talk about the Breach, because they kicked off Saturday against LAG, and like pretty much all of the Breach's matches so far in this stage at least, they went to a game 5, and like most Breach matches, they lost in the game 5. So one, LAG 2-0 on the week, which is ridiculous. And then another is Boston losing another game 5. Which of those is the bigger storyline, or something we should keep watching out for?
I mean, both in my eyes, but obviously I feel like you got to lean towards LAG going 2-0. This was essentially heading into this set of qualifiers, a team that you were basically writing off as maybe a one-win team online. In this set of qualifiers. So for them to pick up 2 in the same week, now there has to be the caveat thrown in there too that these 2 wins are against Minnesota and Boston, who are also teams that have been struggling. It's not like they beat Atlanta and Optic or some of the top teams. But as I always say, you can only beat the team or play the team put in front of you. And they took care of business. And there's been extensive talk over the years about the honeymoon phase and all that. So we'll have to wait and see, get a larger sample size of this new LAG roster, but obviously 2-0 week for them with the new squad is the best potential outcome there for them. On the Boston front, they did win both hard points in this series, but they did lose both searches, and they are now 0-6 in search and destroy since making the roster changes that saw them move on from Slasher and Asim. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I did want to, I could be off in saying this, but map 4 in this series for Boston was it was just a couple points, not as big of a blowout as map 1, but 251-74 on 6-star. Pentagram went 33-18, and I felt like, after watching Boston's matches with this new squad, that's probably been his best map since he has been in the CDL. And I know some people have been talking about his statistical performances so far for this team. So for somebody who has seemingly been on the fringe or the outside looking in of a CDL spot over the last couple of years, to see him finally have a really strong performance in one individual map seems like it could be a step in the right direction. So something to keep an eye on there to see if he continues able to build on that overall. But and then Diamond Con did have a pretty nasty 1v3 in the map 5 that was essentially the game-winning play if I had to pick out a play from this series. So yeah, that was another 3-2 uh, series here, but it was just a impressive performance out of LAG when many people probably weren't expecting it, even though it's two teams fighting at the bottom, and well, like I said, have to see if they're able to build on this now.
I'm just really, I don't know what to really make of Boston at the moment. LAG, I'm just going to kind of wait and see because,
Yeah.
week to week it can kind of change. We saw that really with Miami earlier in the season where they looked like an unstoppable team and then they looked very vulnerable the very next week. So I'm going to wait and see on LAG. But with Boston, like you mentioned, 0-6 in S&D since dropping ASIM and Slasher. Obviously not great. Half of those have been round 11 losses. They had a round 11 loss on Karachi to Miami in game 2, a round 11 six-star S&D loss to Minnesota in game 5, and then obviously round 11 Rio S&D loss to LAG in this series. So half of their S&D losses have come in round 11. They're 6-3 in respawn since making that roster change. Obviously, as one knows, S&D wins championships, and it is not, going 0-6 probably not going to be great for your long-term success, and it is kind of borne out with how Boston has played, losing 3 consecutive game 5s since this roster change. Actually 4 consecutive in total because they lost in game 5 to Minnesota to finish Major 2. So it's been a weird stretch for Boston, who has now lost 5 consecutive matches and lost 8 of their last 9. So not great. Even before the roster change, which is kind of why ASIM was brought in the first place. But like I said, I'm not really sure what to make of that. I think we saw it with Minnesota last stage where they kept losing these really close matches. I think a few game 5s or a few round 11s or something along those lines. And that's just a really difficult thing to decipher whether that's actually something that you should take into account of like, okay, this team just isn't very good. They don't have, the ability to clutch up in these moments. Or is it just kind of like a variance thing, like in the NBA where a team has like a few bad shooting nights and, that might not be indicative of their actual potential, but you still have to play the results in the end. So I'm going to be interested to see if Boston can turn it around. Obviously, they really needed to pick up at least one of these wins against less than stellar opponents. Miami, Minnesota, and LAG. Those are 3 of the worst teams in the league, or at least in the standings. They're near the bottom, so they definitely need to win, and I feel like that they're going to pay for that. Probably going to start in the losers bracket at Major 3, but we'll wait and see on that. Next, we had Toronto versus Carolina. Not a ton of surprises here. Toronto does end up winning the series 3-1. We both picked the Ultra, as most people probably do. But Carolina did win map to the S&D, down 5-2. They win 6-5. And it was a very close Rio hardpoint, the final map of the series, 250 to 238, that Toronto pulls out. Interesting series. Insight, notably, pretty poor KD, but when you win 3-1, it doesn't really matter. Anything jump out to you in regards to this series?
Yeah, I was gonna point out the search. It feels like this running narrative from the Ego Chall podcast about Carolina's search and destroy performance. They'll either have these series where they win the respawns and lose the search and somehow win the series, or they'll have a performance like this where the only map they win is a search. So still not sure what to make of that. But notably, I did see Scrap tweet after that one. GG's Carolina 1-3-1. S&D is slowly making a comeback. So um, that's noteworthy in my eyes that, Toronto knows they have to continue to work on their search and try and get back to where they were earlier in the season. So something to keep an eye on there from Toronto. But yeah, like you said, this was a match you expected Toronto to win in any fashion, whether it was a 3-0 or 3-1. So they got the job done.
Next up, we had LAT versus Minnesota. We both we were split on this match. I went with LAT, you went with Minnesota. I think this is more a guessing game in the end with these two teams because they have been wildly inconsistent, possibly even more so than some of the other teams in the bottom eight. Some of those teams are just like consistently bad. These two teams are a little bit different, and we saw that in this series. LAT goes up 2-0 with very decisive wins in Hardpoint and S&D. A 3-2 control win for Minnesota, and that starts the comeback. And then Minnesota just destroys LAT in the final two maps, pretty much the exact same way that LAT won the first two maps to reverse sweep the Thieves. Standy, 1.23 KD throughout the series. He had 13 kills in the first search, 10 in the second. What jumps out to you, obviously, because we're split on this, or we were split on this prediction, and these have been teams that you really can't predict how they're going to perform match to match.
Yeah, I mean, I was writing the notes as I was watching this one, and after those first two maps and the start of the control, I was literally starting to type in our notes like I was gonna bring it up like, is Minnesota the worst team in the league at this point? And then they have the ridiculous offensive win on invasion control in round 5 to kickstart the reverse sweep. And like you said, it was kind of like that. It was just like, turn the light bulb on, flip the switch, whatever, however you want to say it, where they are able to win the map for hardpoint 250 to 132, which LAT won the first 250 to 133. And then they take the last game 5 search 6-1 when LAT won the search 6-2. So it was kind of like you said, outside of that middle swing mode there in the control, both of the map wins for both teams were pretty lopsided. And yeah, it's based on the way LAT started the series, I was not expecting a reverse sweep, but a pretty big win for Minnesota. Has them at 2-3 now, and LAT, that's their first loss of these qualifiers. If they were able to close this one out, they would be 4-0. At 4-0, even if they lose their next 3 maps, they should have been almost guaranteed for starting in winners bracket at Major 3. So this is a pretty big loss for LAT, especially with the way they started, and a pretty monumental win for Minnesota. I still not really sure what to think of either squad, to be honest, and especially Minnesota. And it just, this is one where it feels like it. You look at the stat sheet. It's good to see the new guys there, and Gunless and Standy being the ones to lead this charge. Especially Standy had like a 3-piece cruise missile in the game 5. He played really well. But I still, and even LAT, Joe DeCeves, who was on the team earlier, got benched, brought back in for this set, had the highest KD for LAT. So the new guys, however you want to say, quote unquote new guys, shining in this series for their respective teams. But still not quite sure whether this really changes my mindset of either squad. It's one where it's going to kind of, cause some doubts about potentially LAT going up against these bottom 8 teams, and then Minnesota. Is this the catalyst that can kind of, get them going in the right direction? We'll have to wait and see on both squads. But obviously, anytime you're able to pick up a win in these qualifiers is a good one, let alone a reverse sweep where you were, seemingly seconds away from being swept yourself, and you're able to flip the script there. So definitely, if you didn't watch this match, it was kind of a low key banger. So check it out.
I think it was Ben Nissim. I think he tweeted something about it might have been during this series or it was after Minnesota's first loss of the week. He said something along the lines like, it looks like Minnesota's change to go with Standy isn't working out, and then obviously they turn it around mid-series and end up winning this match. But I think that's just kind of like the Minnesota and to a different extent the LAT experience. Like neither of these two teams have been consistent. They're also both in a sense kind of rehabilitating players and also looking at rookies, right? Or I don't know if LAT, if they have actually any rookies, but they have a lot of young guys that haven't had a ton of CDL experience. Or Minnesota actually is like they're trying to go with Standy, who already left Minnesota once, has been on a few teams since then, and is now back gunless. The same kind of deal where he was out of the CDL for years actually. I think the last time would have been LAG in like 21 or 22. So this is the first time in a few years that he's there. So Minnesota is in a weird spot where they're really trying to try new and old things at once. And it's kind of the results seem like that's something that it might work sometimes, it might not other times. And this is just one of those series where it wasn't working until it was, and Minnesota ends up pulling out this series. And like you said, now they're 2-3 in the qualifiers, which 2 wins seems like that, kind of the absolute minimum to get a winner's bracket spot. I think 3 almost guarantees you at this point, but I would say that Minnesota is probably in a really, really good position to get a winner's bracket spot, which is the most important thing for them, because if they could just get another chance to win a match at the major, that can go a long way for the points and the standings, and helping them kind of stay out of that bottom 4, which is really the biggest goal for these bottom 8 teams, is just not to be 9 through 12 at this point, because everybody is they're kind of cannibals at this point. They're just eating each other, and no one is really getting out and maintaining a lead over the rest. So it's been very, very interesting to see, especially these 2 teams play each other. But then we go to Sunday, more cannibalization or whatever. And I don't know, like we're going to have a talk about Vegas probably in a little bit. We're going to give them more than 2 matches, but these 2 matches, since making the roster change, bringing in ASIM, have been atrocious. They lose 3-0 to Seattle to kick off Sunday. And now Vegas, in the 2 matches that ASIM has played, they are 0-6 in map count, obviously 0-2 in match count. And they have, just been really kind of atrocious. Like you can expect it in that first match last week. They played Optic. Optic is, the second best, probably at worst 3rd best team in the league right now. You kind of expect that they're going to lose. Seattle, on the other hand, that is a different beast, but maybe we need to give more credit to Seattle. I want to hear what your thoughts on that. Is this, is it more Seattle winning? Should we be talking about how good the Surge are now that they've kind of rebuilt their roster? Or is this Vegas kind of being Vegas, the classic Legion that we've come to know and despise?
I think you have to give some amount of credit to Seattle, especially, building off that win last week over New York, and they won 2 matches. No, they lost to Optic, but they did beat New York.
And then they beat Carolina to start the qualifiers.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of. So yeah. Yeah, I think you have to give some credit to Seattle there, just in terms of bringing in someone. I think I didn't listen to the full post-match interview, but I caught like a glimpse of it. They were talking to Brezzy after the match today, and he was seemingly like saying like a lot of people might not have known in the past, but he's always preferred to be a flex, and he's allowed to be a flex now, and they have a Booza on his desired role of the main AR, and then they got Dak and Hook running the subs, running around really. So it's interesting that this is potentially what it took for Seattle to turn the tides, for no pun intended. But yeah, I just think Vegas too, like, it's my head's all messed up and in a weird spot right now. I don't know how much credit to give to Seattle, or how much needs to be taken away in terms of Vegas's downturn, for lack of a better term, since they made the roster change. I still think Vegas has potential, and I obviously have sung ASIM's praises enough times on this show, so maybe it's just a chemistry thing. They have to figure some things out. After making that change, I don't know, but this should have been a very winnable match from Vegas, so it has me slightly concerned. Not immediately throwing up a red flag here, but it is somewhat concerning that they weren't able to beat Seattle. But at the same time, Seattle coming off that win against New York, now able to beat a team like Vegas too. That has to mean something, and uh, we'll just have to see how they're able to continue to grow as a squad here. But definitely, seemingly feels like I think Allie made a joke on the desk too. It feels like 04 always has a cruise missile in every search or every series, and he had another strong search here with 13 kills. Um, and then yeah, the Seattle wins a control when they notably had very noticeable struggles in control throughout this season so far. So, um, it's always tough, especially in these weeks where these teams are only playing once. It's tough to gauge how much the teams are really improving or not improving and all that. But um, it's a good win for Seattle. We'll just have to keep our eyes on both these squads to see what they do next.
I'm just really interested because if Seattle does end up kind of turning the season around, and Abuza kind of keeps performing, you know, decently well, like he had a very good control map 23 and 18, and it would really just start to make me question Seattle's roster construction in the first place to have him move out of position and out of role, when that was actually a major complaint of the people that, in the EU Challenger scene. I remember when he got
Yeah,
signed to Seattle, people were like, this actually makes no sense, because it's not that he isn't good, it's that he won't be playing the role that he's been used to. And that really was shown through the early part of the season, especially after Illy departed the roster, that it just didn't make sense what was happening. And it seems like maybe things have kind of been, maybe they're different now. It also is kind of difficult to know exactly where they stand, because Vegas is also kind of dealing with a roster change, and Vegas wasn't particularly consistent to begin with. New York is, I have no idea what to make of New York at really any given moment, despite how strong that roster is on paper. Obviously, they lost to Optic, and then they beat Carolina, who obviously is not a great opponent either. So it's a weird thing, but when you're in the bottom eight, like we've been saying, it's important to win these matches.
yeah.
You're competing against the bottom eight. You're not competing against New York and Optic and all of them. And beating New York is a big deal. But it's going to be. We probably just need to wait and see a little bit. But Seattle is definitely starting to creep up. When we end up doing our power rankings, if we had to do them today, like I think Seattle would be much higher than we had them probably in the last one. So it's a really cool thing that they've, at least for the moment, seemed to turn it around just a little bit.
And I will just piggyback off of what you were mentioning on Abuza at the start of the season. That was 100% that obviously we don't have our eyes and ears on the challenger scene as much as some other people, or as much as we may have in the past. But that was definitely one thing when the roster was originally reported of Arcides, Hook, Illy, Abuza. There were a lot of questions about the second sub, and it seemingly was reported that Abuza was going to run that second sub. A lot of questions came out about that, and I honestly think that just because of the way this game plays, the meta and the maps at the start of the game, where there were a lot of 3 AR maps, that we never really had to address that as immediately as we might have in a different title or different maps that might have needed, like, let's just say 3 subs.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of 3 ACR maps at the start here, and that kind of benefited, guys like Arcides, Illy, and Abuza. They were able to do it. Then Hook was just running around with a sub. That works out. But at a different meta, some of these problems that they potentially could have been facing from a role standpoint might have reared their ugly heads even earlier than they did. But now it's seemingly just, especially based on that post game interview with Brezzy, seems like the guys on Seattle now are comfortable in their current roles, and that could be a huge step in the right direction, and be what allows them to grow into, like you said, obviously they did beat New York, so you can't say you're not competing against those teams. But really, at just this point, you got to try and aim for that fifth through eighth spot if you want to be at champs. And these wins are important. So if you're able to get comfortable in your roles at this point in the season and build on that for the rest of major three here and just one more major after that, it's about as close as potentially hitting your stride in the late season as you really can. So we'll have to keep on seeing, but it's potentially a good sign for any Surge fans out there.
One last thing I'll say about the Surge is that their roster right now is a weird one, and not like weird in a bad way, but 04 Abuza and Brezzy had never played in the CDL before this season, and Hook had been kind of like bouncing around teams trying to figure out like a place, really since the Empire, like a place where he can actually call home. So maybe this is the kind of the best possible scenario because it, obviously they had that a little bit with Arcides and Illy in the roster, but I feel like they were much more established players than obviously 04 Abuza and Brezzy in the CDL, and Illy. Obviously that situation is just kind of weird by itself. But I just think like they don't have like necessarily the habits of like this is what we expect of like CDL players. Like they don't really have that kind of experience. So maybe that is sort of helping. Like they're more open to it. And obviously I'm spitballing, I'm speculating on it, but it just seems like this is a different roster, kind of like LAG in a way where there's not a ton of experience, at least at the CDL level. And maybe that does help in not making like too big of a moment of it. And Hook, because he doesn't have like as much CDL experience as you would probably think, just because he's kind of been moving team to team and he's had to kind of get used to new systems and new players. So maybe it's kind of helped that he's been the key piece to stay, because they've kind of been shuffling players in and out trying to figure out what to really do with this roster. So I just think it's really cool that they've done this, and I'm very happy for Seattle because it was a mess earlier in the season, and at least so far in the major two or major three qualifiers, it's gone remarkably better. Next match on Sunday was Optic versus Miami. I don't think there was a ton to talk about. Obviously, the Florida curse is dead. There is no Florida curse anymore. No Miami curse. Optic wins this 3-1. They do drop High Rise S&D 6-5, and I believe someone tweeted that Optic are now like 1-4, 1-5 on High Rise search this season. So that could be, I think it might have been Ben, or it was somebody saying like, should they consider starting to veto High Rise search? But that's obviously something to consider.
They got a good analyst there in JP, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were viewing this match as an opportunity to try and improve their map pool and improve in that map in particular if they know they've struggled throughout the season. But yeah, like you said, this pretty simple series. One, you expect Optic to win, and they come out and take care of business. They do lose the High Rise search, like you said, 6-5. Vickle getting a 1v5 or 1v5 1v2 in the round 11 to close out the 6-5 win.
He took out Karma as well.
And it was what Kenny like called in a cruise missile, and Vickle was like able to get into like the little elevator and stay alive somehow, and then he was able to get the final kill on Kenny after that. So it was kind of a wild ending to that one. That obviously, if Kenny's able to clutch up there, then probably looking at a 3-0. But nonetheless, yeah, this is probably, I know I've said it enough times on this podcast over the years that, any series where Optic wins 3-1 and they win the 3 respawns and lose the search, that's an Optic classic from the Dynasty days in my eyes. So nothing really to expand on there other than, like you said, the Florida/Miami curse seemingly is fully dead at this point.
Yeah, if they can outslay and then just win respawns, like that's classic Optic. That's what we've come to expect. I don't really have too much on that. Miami, it's just been a tough schedule for them since Real came in. nothing they can really do. They do have a win, so that's always good, courtesy of Boston. So that's nice. But yeah, Optic moves to 3-1, Miami to 1-3, and then we move to the final match on the weekend: New York versus Atlanta, finishing out with another match between the top four. I think we had Atlanta versus Toronto last week,
Yeah,
and I think maybe Atlanta versus Optic maybe week one.
sounds right.
But so we've, the CDL has kind of been making a point to showcase these top four teams as the very final match of the weekend, and they did it again this weekend with the Subliners and FaZe. It wasn't the most competitive series, considering FaZe is just kind of like dominating everyone. Um, they did it again. They did have a very close search and destroy. I don't want to gloss over that. It was 6-5 for FaZe, and then the Subliners swept High Rise Control, but the hard points were not close. Nearly 100 point club to open up the series, 250 to 105 in favor of FaZe, and then nearly 100 point victory again on Karachi. So FaZe wins this 3-1. They move to 4-0, and the Subliners now are 1-3. Is a bigger deal that the Subliners are 1-3, or that FaZe is kind of transforming into 2021 FaZe right before our eyes?
I think the bigger deal has to be New York underperforming. But yeah, obviously FaZe is said it last episode and or maybe the episode before. I'm not ready to say FaZe has hit final form yet, but they're about as close to potentially their top level as they've been in a while. So that's scary. I mean, literally map one of this series, they were up like 50 to whatever through like two hills, and they were already shooting New York's bodies. Like there was one, I think it was a BZ, literally like got a kill, and there was another guy on New York behind him, and in my eyes, it looked like he just like kept on shooting the New York guy's body instead of potentially moving the cursor up a little bit to try and get the two piece. It was just they put on a masterclass performance there in the Rio. I think Simp even tweeted uh after the series, if I remember, something along the lines of like, when are they gonna learn, or something like that. Yeah, I can't believe we're still getting chowed on Rio. Hashtag don't chow that. So it seems like now they have thrown the gauntlet down. It'll be interesting to see if that is actually vetoed against them. Because a team like FaZe, as good as they have been in recent months, if you have a map that you have to veto against them, that especially if you're not super comfortable with your map set or as comfortable as FaZe seemingly is, like that can almost, like, if you have to go into that series and you have to veto Rio Hardpoint, like if you have a map that you're like, I'm not really sure, but they're just so good at Rio, we have to get rid of it, then you can potentially play them on that other map, and then you're just going to lose anyway. So really could play some mind games in the veto system before you're literally on the server getting your body shot. So um that's going to be something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Probably is, one of those weird stats that I always fascinate myself with somehow. But nonetheless, yeah, like you said, the search was close. Came down to another round 11. Did we have? Oh no, the Seattle search was 6-4. We almost had three 6-5 searches today, one round short. But the control was noteworthy to me. A 3-0 performance out of New York, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Atlanta started on offense, and I don't think they captured either zone, or if they did, they only got one zone in the two offenses. It was kind of like a very clean performance out of New York. And that kind of got me thinking. And even the start of Karachi, it felt like map 4 was a little bit closer. Than obviously Atlanta pulls away in the end. But I was just like, I was a little confused, especially mostly thinking about the first map, like just, literally FaZe shooting bodies right at the start of the map, like, what's going on here? But obviously they're able to close it out, get the win in the end. So, just another strong performance out of the boys, and yeah, it can't really, outside of that 3-0 in control, that seemed a little weird from me. Other than that, they took care of business here, and now, like you said, yeah, like New York at 1-3, I guess I can just scroll down here and look at their schedule for next week. So this next week they play Miami and Vegas, especially the way Vegas has played lately. Those are two matches that New York seemingly has to win. And if they don't win, then we're going to have a very serious conversation next week about, what's going on there and if there's any red flags being thrown there or what's going on. But those are definitely two matches you expect New York to win. But yeah, I mean, at 1-3 now with three matches left to go, and those two matches, you almost have to win both to put yourself at 3-3 and in a good spot to start in winners bracket. Because if they don't start in winners bracket, that's really gonna, throw a wrench in the major three bracket and the seedings, because that could have a big impact there on the matchups and stuff. And then seemingly, you expect a team like New York to show up on land even if they're starting in the losers bracket, and then they play a team like Boston or Minnesota first match in losers bracket. They're basically, they wouldn't play because they wouldn't start winners, but you know what I mean. You would expect New York to face a lower ranked opponent in the standings first match if they start in the loser bracket, and that could basically just end that team's tournament right there. So, tough qualifier so far for them, but they definitely have a very good opportunity this upcoming week to turn things around, and I am expecting them to do so. And if they don't, we'll have to talk about that then if it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't, then like roster change seems almost inevitable. Like I know.
I don't know what you do.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what was it, the Optic dilemma from last year, where we like the roster is about as good as you can probably get, and if you can't perform, then I mean the obvious answer would be Sib out because he was the newest guy in, which is kind of like the Atlanta FaZe solution was, okay, Slasher was in, we didn't achieve our goals, who's out, okay, Slasher again. That really is like the only thing. I mean, really, if they're gonna make a roster change, obviously we're not, a lot of things have to continue to keep going wrong, I think, until New York would get to that point. But if they did, I wouldn't be shocked if they targeted like a player already on a CDL team. Like not saying Gwen in particular, but like someone like Gwen who has shown like to have a lot of talent. Maybe they can buy him out of his contract. Carolina, the organization, whatever, Infinite Reality, they're like, oh, that's quite a bit of money that this team is offering us for a player. We're having a pretty bad season. Let's sell him. Something like that. Maybe we get in that situation like Pred was in last year, where a team is like, well, should we part ways with this guy because we're kind of teetering or whatever. I think that's an interesting potential scenario, but again, they have to really keep sliding this way for it to even become reality at that point. But I did want to talk about FaZe because they have been absolutely dominant. So they have now won 8 straight matches in the CDL, all 4 matches at Major 2, including a best of 7 series against Optic in the grand finals. In their last 6 matches, none of them have went to a game 5. They went to game 5s against LAT and New York in their first 2 matches of Major 2. And have since then, no team has won at more than 1 map in a series, including that 4-1 win in the grand finals against Optic. Their last loss in the CDL, Atlanta FaZe, the Los Angeles Guerrillas, a 3-2 loss back on March 17th. So we have now gone about 6 weeks since the last Atlanta FaZe loss. And FaZe has won 13 of their last 15 matches. And that's since they lost to the Toronto Ultra at Major 1. So they lost 2 matches to Toronto at Major 1. They have lost 2 matches since then. So that is 3 months exactly now that they have lost 2 matches in. It does seem like this is the Atlanta FaZe that we saw in 2021, where they absolutely obliterated teams. They're kind of, obviously they can be caught theoretically in the standings, but they're kind of running away with the standings as well. This season, they are 23-4 in match count. They have a 72% map win percentage, and they have a 50-point lead on second place in the regular season standings, which is Toronto. And Toronto is, who knows how consistent they're going to be over the next few weeks or next month. So FaZe has a very good chance of increasing that lead, which would essentially, that you only get 100 points for getting first at a major. It's very likely FaZe is not going to fall like in that bottom 8, top 6 area. I think they've only done that like once or twice in CDL history. So it's going to be hard for any team to really catch up with them unless FaZe just has an abysmal major performance, which doesn't typically happen. So I don't know if you had anything on that, because I've just been really impressed. Every single week it seems like I'm like, all right, maybe this is like the best team like definitively over the last few years, because no other team really seems like they've dominated in the CDL like FaZe has in 2021 until probably now.
Yeah, like I said, they definitely, in my eyes at least, if they aren't at final form yet, which I don't think they are, which is definitely a scary sentiment on its own. They're about as close as they're gonna be before you can probably get there. And I think if they have a flawless run through these qualifiers and they win Major 3, then it's basically just a one-team race at that point, and everybody else is seemingly going to be fighting for second. So, yeah, I really, it's got to be something for the rest of the league. They're just like, what can we even do? So I really don't have much beyond that. It's just that core 3 there of Simpa, BZ, and Cell been doing it together for the last few years, and I think a lot of some long-term fans like us look back on the Cole dynasty, and more recent fans are it's not even that recent really, but the Optic dynasty too, and in an era now where there aren't as many quote-unquote major tournaments and that thing, the longevity that these guys are able to do it on a consistent basis, even when they have some hiccups along the way, you still expect them to be there competing for a title on Sundays. It's really impressive, and yeah, I'm back in that mode where I'm not picking against FaZe until I have a reason to. So, we'll have to see, and I'm definitely excited for Major 3 though, because I think that's a big turning point. Either way, like in a scenario where FaZe somehow doesn't win Major 3, then that's going to open up like a whole new can of worms. Like, is there another new power? Like what's going on there? It obviously would depend on the circumstances of that, but and then if they are able to just dominate, brute force their way to another back-to-back title, it's like, okay, what is anyone going to be able to beat them the rest of the year?
Yeah, I would say, granted that it's back in the day, it was a lot more unpredictable. The path to a championship was a little bit murkier just because of the way that you had to go about it. You had to go through group play, then you had to go through bracket play. So like just in terms of length, that made it a little more, I wouldn't say difficult necessarily, because it wasn't like the consistency of your opponents or the quality of your opponents was necessarily any higher than it is now. I would actually say like FaZe plays, at least on a consistent basis, they're playing Toronto, New York, and Optic, like some variation of those opponents en route to a championship, where that might not be the case for some of those other teams, back in like the CWL, or even like before then, like in the MLG days. You could play like Tainted Minds or something in the first round of the bracket. It's like, okay, like you're probably going to win, you play E6, etc. That being said, like I think FaZe, and I've been watching since Frico became like, at least the predominant team at that time, and then obviously Complexity. So I've been watching since then. FaZe feels by far the most inevitable of any of those teams, of the Cole dynasty, the Optic dynasty. Like this, granted, FaZe has had like a different, really like I would just say Salium, Simp, and Abizi, because they've been the consistent parts of that. They feel like the most inevitable, like that they will at least be in the grand finals, if not winning a championship. And I think that's pretty crazy that those players, that team has consistently done it so much that, even as someone who's watched competitive Call of Duty for more than 10 years, that I'm just like, yeah, I just kind of expect that they will be there at the end of the tournament. And if they're not, like, say, I think they didn't get to the grand finals of champs last year, that's like stunning to me that they didn't even make the grand finals, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, FaZe, top of the top of the top. When we do our predictions in a moment, don't expect us to be picking against them, and probably for quite a bit at this point. So pick them. You are 96-49 on the season. You went 5-3 this past week. I had probably my worst week of the season, 3-5. A pretty unpredictable week in general, because we had quite a few of the bottom 8 playing against each other, which is always not great for predictability. But then Tremor's down at 0-1, so at least I'm not in last place.
Yeah.
So now we move to the 4th week of the Major 3 qualifiers. We're almost done. Not quite, but we're almost there. And then we'll get to actually see LAN play again. But starting on Friday, May 3rd, we're already into May. 3 matches on Friday, starting with Miami versus New York. I mean, if New York loses, then the world is ending, the sky is falling, and Miami is winning champs. But I'm going to go with the subliners.
Yeah, I'm going to go with New York too. I already said it.
It's a do or die week for New York. Optic versus Boston. Considering Boston has not won a single match, and Optic has only lost the FaZe really over the last month and a half, I'm going to go with Optic.
Yep, they can Optic too.
And the final match on Friday, Vegas versus Atlanta. As we just said, I think we're both going to be going with FaZe.
Yep, FaZe up.
Saturday, May 5th, we have 3 matches as well, starting with Vegas versus New York, which I think is a little more interesting of a matchup for New York, considering the Legion have just looked way better than Miami at certain points this season. Right now, they have not looked better than Miami, and I'm going to go with New York for that reason.
Me too.
Atlanta versus Carolina, going to go with Atlanta.
Yep.
And Optic versus LAG. Despite LAG trying to shed their online Guerrillas form, I cannot pick them. Hey, we didn't pick them last week. I don't think we really should pick them this week. So, Optic.
I picked them against Boston, at least. But no, this is the one when I was going through these. It seemed like it was going to be all chalk for us for these first 2 days of next week, and this was really the only one where I was like, do I really want to pick an upset and just fully go on the Guerrillas bandwagon? But that has only proved to not work well for you in the past, so I'm not going to do it here. But I am excited to see, obviously, like we said, 2-0 week for LAG this week against not great teams. This is a matchup where the new roster will really be put to the test. If Flames has a really strong performance in this matchup against this squad, that'll be a really big accolade or just achievement. Even if they're able to lose, it'll open some eyes potentially even more to his potential. So I'm gonna go with Optic, but this is one I definitely am a little more excited to see than I potentially would have like last week before the roster changes or 2-0 week.
Of course. Sunday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, starting with Seattle versus Miami. I'm gonna go with the Surge, but I'm not 100% bought in on the Surge's reclamation project or reformation. But I'm going to go with the Surge just because they're a little more of a safer pick at this moment than the Heretics.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm not probably 100% sold on Seattle yet, but against Miami, I'm pretty 99% sold that this is a match they should win. So I'll take Seattle too.
So that match and the last match of Sunday are, I think, the most unpredictable, like at least on paper. But they're, again, like, who knows, because New York has not played up to their standard. If LAG actually plays really well, then that might throw a wrench into things. But yeah, we're both going with Seattle. And then next match, Toronto versus Minnesota. I'm still not buying into Minnesota, so I don't care what those last 3 maps of that series against LAT mean. I'm gonna go with the Ultra.
Yep, Team Toronto.
And then this one I think is the most unpredictable because Boston has went to Game 5 with each of their opponents. They went to a round 11, each of their opponents. LAT absolutely collapsed in the final 3 maps against Minnesota after dominating them. I'm gonna go with Boston because Boston is my team this year, and there's a very real chance that they could pull out this series, and I want to be on that bandwagon when it starts taking off.
Yeah, I just can't pick Boston at this point, so I'm gonna have to go with Thieves. But I definitely agree with you that this and the Seattle Miami match are very unpredictable, and as you said probably about 20 minutes ago, it seemed like these last 3 weeks, the CDL was purposely putting a banger top 4 match
And they did it again.
End the week, and they did not do it in this
No, they
case.
did it again. Boston versus
This
LAT.
is one, it could be a low-key banger that goes Game 5, but it's definitely not going to be the same caliber of COD as you'd expect from Optic versus FaZe or FaZe versus Toronto and all that, so... I'll take the Thieves here. Make sure that we have at least one match different between us for pick'em's sake, but definitely not one I'm super comfortable in. But I do gotta say I can't pick Boston at this point. So
this is a Crimp Revenge game. This is a Pentagram Bowl. This is
storylines.
The Slasher Bowl. I don't know. Like there's so many storylines here. This is probably the best banger of them all. It might be the most competitive of those matches that we've had to finish a week so far. So we'll wait and see on that. But yeah, that does it for the pick'em. That does it for this week's episode. A little bit shorter, like we said at the top of the show, even though we're pushing up right against an hour, which is a nice, concise Ego Chall podcast episode. We usually are like an hour 5, hour 10. I think last week was like almost an hour and 30. Probably not going to be doing that a ton during the summer. I don't want to die of dehydration while I'm doing the podcast, but thank you guys for listening or watching. Make sure to subscribe, like the podcast feed, follow the feed wherever you're supporting us. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. I believe there's a 5-star rating on Spotify as well, so you can do that there. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, in the podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. We'll be back sometime next week, probably Sunday for the live show, Monday for the podcast feed, but just make sure to follow the feed or subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you will not miss anything. You'll get it right when we upload it, and you'll be able to enjoy it as we upload it. So thank you guys for listening or watching, and Bink, take it away.
Yeah, like you said, I'm definitely starting to sweat, so gonna get out of here. But thank you guys as always for all the support. Do let us know if you like the Sunday schedule or not. That seems to be what we're gonna have to do for the foreseeable future right now, especially I just had softball start up and those games are all on Mondays for whatever reason. So seems like the Sunday angle is the best unless we get a bunch of comments saying you guys prefer a different day or whatnot, but let us know either way. And yeah, other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the last week of matches. I know we get in these slogs where it's a bunch of weeks of online matches and you just want to get back to LAN, but I promise we're almost there. Just gotta tough it out couple more weeks and we'll be back eventually. So thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.